Most men like to believe they are in full control of their lives, their thoughts, and their actions. They like to imagine that every choice they make is rational, deliberate, born from logic rather than impulse. But if you strip away the polished surface and look at the raw undercurrent that drives so much of male behavior, a different story emerges. A story where desire is not just a passing spark but a consuming fire that men struggle to contain. The uncomfortable truth is that men, far more than women, are slaves to their own desire. It shapes their decisions, influences their priorities, and quietly dictates the direction of their lives in ways they often don't recognize until it's too late. Picture this. A man is walking down the street on his way to work. His mind is focused on a meeting, deadlines, bills that need to be paid. But then in an instant, his attention is hijacked. A woman passes by, and without his permission, his focus shifts completely. His pulse quickens, his thoughts scatter, and suddenly, he's no longer thinking about his meeting. He's caught in a flood of impulses, imagining, wondering, reacting. In the span of seconds, his mental state has been rewritten by something as simple as a glance. The woman, meanwhile, continues walking, perhaps barely aware of the effect she's had, because for her, the stakes are different. She may notice, she may register, but her attention doesn't derail in the same catastrophic way. This is the silent imbalance at the heart of desire. From the outside, it's easy to laugh at this scene. After all, what harm can a passing thought cause? But multiply this by a lifetime, by thousands of small encounters, and you begin to see how deeply this force shapes the path of a man's existence. Entire days can be rerouted. Decisions about where to go, how to dress, what to buy, which risks to take, all of these at their root often trace back to desire. For men, it is not just one influence among many, it is the gravitational center around which so much of their life orbits. Biology tells part of the story. High levels of testosterone prime men for visual and physical attraction, making them more reactive to external cues. It's not just that men notice beauty, it's that their brains light up with urgency, with intensity, pushing them toward action. Women, on the other hand, have desire that is more contextual, more layered. Their attraction often builds through a mixture of safety, status, confidence, and connection. For men, however, it can be immediate, overwhelming, and nearly impossible to ignore. That difference creates a vulnerability, one that history has exposed over and over again. Look back across civilizations, and you'll find countless examples of kings, generals, and leaders who lost everything because of desire. Empires fell, wars ignited, alliances shattered, not over money or power alone, but over women. Helen of Troy is remembered as the face that launched 1,000 ships, not because she was a general, but because her beauty sparked an obsession that reshaped history. This pattern repeats in smaller ways every single day. A man who risks his career for an office affair, a politician who destroys his reputation over scandal, an ordinary guy who throws away years of stability for a fleeting attraction. In each case, the common thread is the same. Desire takes the wheel, and reason becomes a passenger. But here's the deeper, more dangerous truth. When a man is controlled by desire, he rarely admits it. In fact, he often disguises it beneath layers of justification. He convinces himself he wanted the new car for its performance, not because he imagined it would attract women. He says he worked long hours to achieve success, not realizing how much of his drive came from wanting to be noticed. Men don't just respond to desire directly, they build entire identities around it, masking the truth even from themselves. This makes desire not only powerful, but insidious, because it dictates their lives in silence. And while some may argue that women are just as bound by attraction, the evidence doesn't hold up. Women certainly feel desire, but they are not derailed by it in the same way. They process attraction as one thread in a larger web of instincts. A woman may notice a handsome man, but she weighs it against his behavior, his confidence, his ability to lead. Her attention is filtered through layers of subconscious calculation. For men, those filters are far thinner. One look, one moment can seize control, making rational thought an afterthought. That is why desire controls men more than women. It is not that women are immune, but that they are less enslaved. When you see this pattern for what it is, you begin to understand why men often feel restless, distracted, even tormented by forces they can't name. They live under the illusion of choice, but in reality, they are constantly reacting to impulses that were never really theirs. And until a man learns to master this dynamic, he will remain at its mercy. The greatest battles men face are not fought with armies or with rivals, but within themselves, against the silent but relentless pull of desire. The tragedy is that most men don't even recognize when they've lost control. They mistake their reactions for natural instincts that can't be helped, shrugging off their impulses as something universal, something inevitable. But what separates those who stay enslaved from those who rise above is awareness. Without awareness, a man becomes predictable, easy to manipulate, a puppet pulled by strings he cannot see. Advertisers know this. Social media companies know this. Entire industries thrive on the simple fact that men are more impulsively wired by desire. Why do so many commercials feature beautiful women? Why do platforms flood feeds with images designed to captivate? Because the male brain, conditioned to chase, cannot look away. Desire isn't just a personal weakness, it's a billion-dollar business model. And yet the deeper problem isn't just in the external world. It lies in the way men internalize these impulses and let them define who they are. Think about the countless young men who spend hours chasing validation through likes, swipes, or empty encounters. They convince themselves they're pursuing freedom when in reality, they're trapped in an invisible cage. Each swipe, each glance, each fleeting interaction tightens the bars around them. The illusion of choice hides the truth. They aren't choosing at all. They're reacting, surrendering their focus, their time, and ultimately their lives to a force that owns them. Women, by contrast, are not immune, but they are often positioned differently in this dynamic. They are more accustomed to being the subject of pursuit, and over centuries this has shaped a form of resilience. A woman notices attraction but doesn't immediately shift her life around it. She evaluates, measures, compares, and places desire into a broader frame. For men, the frame collapses in an instant, and that collapse is where chaos begins. When a man cannot control his desire, it leaks into everything: his ambitions, his friendships, his sense of self-worth. He becomes the type of man who can be led by the simplest glance, the type of man who sabotages his own potential because he never learned to master the storm inside him. Consider the weight of this imbalance in relationships. A man might meet a woman who captivates him instantly. The more he wants her, the more his behavior shifts. He begins to text more, call more, offer more, as if giving and chasing will secure her affection. But the paradox is that this flood of desire often has the opposite effect. The more he chases, the less she values him. What was once attraction begins to look like desperation, and what began as magnetism turns into suffocation. This is the cruel irony of male desire. It burns so hot that it destroys the very connection it seeks to create. The strongest men, the ones women can't forget, are not those who feel no desire, but those who hold it in balance. Imagine two men entering the same room. One is overwhelmed by the sight of a beautiful woman. His body language betrays him. His energy is consumed by silent pursuit. The other notices her too, but he doesn't collapse into it. He stays grounded, calm, aware. His desire doesn't vanish, but it doesn't own him. To the woman, the second man radiates something rare. He feels safe, unshakable, magnetic, not because he is void of attraction, but because he contains it. He is the storm held within the calm. This difference explains why women often describe being drawn to men who appear mysterious or composed. It's not mystery for its own sake, it's the quiet signal of control. It's the subconscious recognition that this man will not be easily swayed, that he cannot be hijacked by every passing impulse. To a woman, this restraint reads as power, and power is what amplifies desire. Ironically, the men who try hardest to satisfy their impulses end up with the least, while those who restrain themselves attract more than they could ever chase. And this isn't just about romance. The grip of desire extends into every arena of a man's life. Careers are pursued less for passion and more for the status or recognition that might lead to attention. Risks are taken not for growth, but for the chance of admiration. Even creativity, art, and ambition can become warped when the hidden driver is not love of the craft, but the hope of being desired. The tragedy is not that men feel this impulse. The tragedy is that so few ever confront it directly. They bury it under excuses, they cover it with ambition, but it still dictates their path like a shadow puppeteer. The question then is not whether men feel desire more intensely than women. That much is obvious. The real question is, what will a man do with that knowledge? Will he allow himself to stay chained, constantly reacting to every spark that ignites within him? Or will he learn to master the fire, to hold it without letting it consume him? The answer to that question determines whether he lives as a servant to his impulses or as a man who commands himself. When you start to look closely at how desire operates in men's lives, the patterns become impossible to ignore. You see it in the man who spends his paycheck on flashy clothes or an expensive car, not because he loves them, but because he imagines they'll make him more appealing. You see it in the guy who compromises his values, pretending to be someone he's not just to keep a woman's attention. You see it in the endless parade of men who lose their focus, their drive, even their dignity, all because their desire was triggered and they didn't know how to manage it. What looks like choice is often just compulsion wearing a disguise. And this is the great difference. Women may feel desire, but they are not hijacked by it in the same way. They can notice, even be moved by attraction, and still continue with their day without collapsing into obsession. Men, however, can find themselves spiraling within minutes. A casual encounter becomes a fixation. a harmless glance becomes a storyline that consumes hours of thought. This is why the stereotype of the strong, silent man carries such weight in culture. It's not about silence, it's about discipline. It's about a man showing, consciously or unconsciously, that he is not ruled by every flicker of temptation. But here's the paradox that so many miss. The very thing men believe will win them love often guarantees they lose it. They chase, they offer everything, they make themselves completely available, thinking that the intensity of their desire will prove their worth. Yet what happens is the opposite. The woman, seeing that his sense of self bends so easily, begins to feel less desire for him. He becomes predictable, safe in the wrong way, and his desperation suffocates the spark. This is not cruelty on her part. It is instinct. For women, attraction thrives in the presence of strength, composure, and the mystery of self-control. A man consumed by desire offers none of those things. This explains why men often find themselves frustrated, confused, even bitter about attraction. They think, I gave her everything. I showed her how much I wanted her. Why wasn't it enough? They fail to see that desire, when uncontrolled, is not attractive. It is repelling. The more they give away their power, the less value they hold. A man who places a woman on a pedestal loses his footing in the process, and the imbalance kills the attraction that once sparked between them. Yet not every man falls into this trap. Some learn, either by wisdom or experience, to reverse the script. They don't deny their desire, they acknowledge it, they feel it, but they do not let it dictate their every move. These men develop a presence that feels different. They walk into a room without needing attention, but they receive it anyway. They interact with women without bending, without grasping, and somehow that restraint becomes magnetic. The woman feels it instantly, often without knowing why. Here is a man who is not enslaved by her presence. Here is someone who desires but does not collapse. That subtle difference is what separates men who fade from memory and men who linger in the mind long after they've left. There's a reason why history, literature, and film often highlight the archetype of the man who remains calm under pressure. Think of the spy who resists temptation, the leader who doesn't flinch, the lover who doesn't need to declare his feelings with 1,000 words. These characters are compelling not because they lack desire, but because they contain it. Their restraint speaks louder than desperation ever could. Women respond to this instinctively, because it signals that the man holds mastery not just over his world, but over himself. And here's where the greatest irony lies. Men spend their lives trying to satisfy desire, believing that if they chase enough, give enough, or prove enough, they'll finally win the fulfillment they seek. But the men who are most desired are those who learn to step back, to channel their energy inward, to prioritize control over compulsion. They are the ones who no longer radiate need, and because of that they radiate strength. Desire in men is powerful, but when uncontrolled, it weakens them. When mastered, it transforms them into something unforgettable. This mastery is not about suppression. Suppression only breeds frustration and resentment. It's about transformation, turning that raw energy into focus, drive, and presence. When a man redirects desire away from compulsive reaction and towards self-mastery, everything changes. His work sharpens, his relationships deepen, his confidence grows. Women notice not because he is chasing, but because he is standing still in his own gravity, unmoved by the chaos that enslaves others. This is how desire, once a chain, becomes fuel. But make no mistake, this path is not easy. It requires a man to face himself, to confront the parts of his nature that would rather take the easy route of indulgence. It requires him to notice the impulse without obeying it, to endure the fire without being consumed. Most men will never take this path because it demands more discipline than they are willing to give. But for the few who do, the rewards are beyond anything they could imagine. They no longer chase women. They no longer live in the restless grip of need. They become the kind of men who are pursued, respected, and remembered. The final truth men must face is that desire, left unchecked, is not simply a private struggle. It bleeds into every area of life, shaping identities, relationships, even societies. A man who cannot master his desire will find himself mastered by others, because those who understand this weakness can use it to control him. Think of the countless ways men have been lured, distracted, or manipulated, not through logic, not through argument, but through desire. It is the softest weapon and the sharpest at the same time, capable of undoing men more thoroughly than war or violence ever could. And the most dangerous part is that it rarely feels like control. It feels like choice. It feels like freedom. But beneath the surface, it is a chain. Every man remembers moments when he lost himself in that chain. The time he pursued a woman who gave him nothing in return, burning weeks or months in obsession. The time he made reckless decisions just to hold someone's attention. The time he confused lust for love and paid the price. These aren't isolated mistakes, they are part of a pattern stretching back through human history. Desire rules men far more than they admit, while women, though not untouched by it, are less bound, less consumed. That is why the burden falls heavier on men to master it, because the cost of failure is greater. But what happens when a man learns to take back control? The transformation is profound. His energy no longer scatters in 1,000 directions, chasing after every fleeting impulse. Instead, it consolidates. His focus sharpens. He no longer feels the constant tug of need that weakens his presence. He carries himself differently, not because he pretends to be indifferent, but because he is genuinely grounded. That change is magnetic. People sense it, women sense it. He becomes a man who doesn't have to chase because he radiates the power of restraint. This is the paradox of desire. The more desperately you try to satisfy it, the less fulfilled you become. But the moment you stop letting it control you, it begins to serve you. The energy that once left you restless can now fuel your purpose. The fire that once consumed you can now light your path. This is why men who master themselves often achieve greatness, not because they are void of desire, but because they have redirected it. They take the same intensity that once distracted them and turn it into ambition, creativity, leadership. And in doing so, they rise above the chaos that keeps most men trapped. Women respond to this not because they want men to be emotionless, but because they crave the presence of a man who is not easily shaken. A man who can feel desire and not collapse under it. A man who can want without losing himself. This balance is what creates safety and attraction simultaneously. He is not cold, he is composed. He is not distant, he is disciplined. And in a world where most men are ruled by impulse, this makes him extraordinary. The challenge is not to eliminate desire. To try to erase it is to deny your humanity. The challenge is to learn to live with it, to stand in its presence without bowing, to take the spark and use it rather than letting it use you. This is the essence of masculinity at its highest form. Not brute strength, not empty bravado, but mastery over the forces within. A man who achieves this doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to prove himself, doesn't need to chase. His very presence speaks for him. History remembers men who conquered nations, but it reveres those who conquered themselves. Because in the end, no external victory means anything if you are still a prisoner to your own impulses. Desire is not the enemy, it is a test. It asks every man a simple question: will you serve it or will it serve you? The answer determines whether you live a life of distraction, constantly pulled by forces outside yourself, or a life of power, where every moment, every decision, and every relationship flows from a place of strength. So the truth is clear: men are more controlled by desire than women. But this does not have to be a sentence, it can be an opportunity. Those who remain blind will stay trapped, repeating the same mistakes across generations. But those who open their eyes, who confront the fire directly, will find a freedom that few ever taste. The freedom of self-mastery, the freedom of standing in a world of chaos and remaining unmoved. The freedom of knowing that desire, which once enslaved you, is now the very force that makes you unforgettable, and in that moment everything changes. Because the man who no longer chases is the man who is chased. The man who no longer bends is the man who others lean on, and the man who no longer serves desire is the man who commands it. That is the rarest power of all. At the end of it all, desire is neither good nor bad. It is raw energy, ancient and untamed, a force that has driven men to build cities, write poetry, fight battles, and risk everything. Without it, humanity would not exist. But when left unchecked, that same fire burns men alive from the inside out. It blinds them, enslaves them, and makes them weaker than they realize. The difference between those who rise and those who fall is not in whether they feel desire. Every man feels it, it's in how they handle it. The man who remains a servant to his impulses will always live chasing shadows, mistaking every spark for fulfillment. But the man who learns to master desire transforms it into something else entirely. He channels it into purpose, into discipline, into presence. He becomes steady where others are restless, composed where others are chaotic. And it is precisely this steadiness that makes him powerful in the eyes of others, especially women. Because deep down, people are not drawn to those who have no fire. They are drawn to those who have the fire, but refuse to let it consume them. So the challenge is simple but not easy. Feel your desire. Notice it. Respect it. But do not let it own you. Let it remind you of your humanity. Then turn it into fuel for something greater. Because the man who can look desire in the eye without bowing is the man who commands not just himself, but the world around him. That is the difference between being forgotten and being unforgettable. And that is why, though desire controls most men, the rare few who control desire will always stand apart.